founder of Life 365, and welcome to season three, episode 6 of The New Normal. On today's episode, we'll be discussing intelligent wearables, biosensors, and their impact on healthcare. I want to take a minute to thank our panelists for joining us today and sharing their valuable time. I would also like to thank our attendees for your interest in joining us today. As for the structure of the webinar, attendees will be on mute and will have reserved time at the end for questions. Please place your questions within the Q&A. You can review the recording on today's webinar on www.newnormal.buzz. Just a little bit of background, the powerful combination of sensors, machine learning algorithms, and wearable devices is opening up new possibilities in healthcare. Sensors are getting smaller, lower power, and more precise. As the research and development into these technology continues, one can only imagine the possibilities that await. We're going to discuss how we can take advantage of the insights from these technologies to improve care, reduce cost, and enhance the patient and consumer experience. Now I want to introduce our distinguished panelists. First off is Dave Albert, MD, is a physician, inventor, and serial entrepreneur who's developed life-saving technology and products, turning a number of those innovations into tech startups. Today, he is founder of 3 technology companies, including Novacare, Novalarm, Lifetone Technologies, and AliveCor, CardioMobile. His latest invention, AliveCor's CardioMobile person ECG technology, became a global sensation via YouTube video in January 2011 around the Consumer Electronics Show, and was featured on ABC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, among many other media outlets. Dr. Albert has 72 issued patents, a large number pending, and several new secret inventions in development. Hope he'll share those with us today. He has authored or co-authored over 100 scientific abstracts and publications, principally in the cardiology literature. Dr. Albert has lectured at the entrepreneurship programs of the MIT Sloan School and the University of Oklahoma. Dr. Albert graduated with honors from Harvard College and from Duke University Medical School. So welcome, Dr. Albert.
Thank you.
Thanks. The next person is Ian Shadforth, founder and CEO of AffirmXH. Ian is a Cambridge-educated scientist with a doctorate in bioinformatics from Cranfield University and an MBA from the University of Dundee. He has a wealth of experience in science, strategy, and development of connected health ecosystems comprising medical and consumer hardware integrated with cloud and mobile software. Ian has pioneered a number of cutting-edge programs for large and small companies, including Johnson & Johnson R&D, lead for diabetes management tools, including the development of the first iPhone connected blood glucose meter, Alere, concept and technical leadership of the MyAlere Health Management Program, Analytics for Life, Core Vista, development of a non-invasive machine learned platform for the identification of cardiovascular disease. Currently, Ian is the co-CEO of AffirmXH, a startup focusing on harnessing the power of continuous sensing to help individuals experience health. Their first product, WellTeach, a continuous temperature monitor for infants, will be launched in the next few months. And next is Dr. Eric Luster, is the CEO and founder of Movement Interactive, Inc. After 14 years in senior roles at the Department of Defense as a nuclear, biological, and chemical specialist and a research scientist and engineer, Eric began his work in the design of person-centered healthcare technologies. In 2012, he invented Headband, a device created to detect and report traumatic brain injury in athletes. Eric is the current president and chairman of the board at Waymark Gardens Senior Living Community, where he spearheads the renovation and development of a smart facility designed to improve the safety, communication, and experience of valued residents. He also sits on the community advisory board for the Center of Innovation in Healthy and Resilient Aging at Arizona State University, which focuses on advancing technology that combat disease and providing innovative and technology-driven solutions for seniors. So enough of me talking. I want to get on to the panelists right away. A little bit of context of what we're going to do. I'm going to ask the panelists to briefly share some of the information regarding their organization. So Dr. Albert, if you could kick it off and try to give your background and the mission of CardioMobile.
Well,
or AliveCor, sorry.
Well, AliveCor, and many people know us by Cardia because of our television ads. I was watching 60 Minutes and saw one the other night. It still gives me a thrill to see my own invention on television. You know, we're dedicated to improving heart health on a global basis. AliveCor today sells its products and services in 42 countries and have recorded over 2 million people have recorded over 150 million ECGs. And we're, you know, full disclosure, Mayo Clinic is an investor, as is Qualcomm, as is Omron. So we have both consumer medical as well as the kind of pinnacle of our high-tech medical world as partners, as we help take personal technology and bring it to the home and bring it to the individual to improve their outcomes. And that's, you know, in medicine, that's the bottom line. If we can save money and improve outcomes, that's a two-piece trifecta. I don't know what the third piece is, but it's two of those pieces. So that AliveCor is dedicated to that, and we have a number of new products and new services that are aimed at helping people improve, maintain their heart health.
That's awesome. I'm going to move over to Ian here in a second, but I'm going to ask you a question. Were you a pioneer in the space or a settler?
Yes,
right?
I think everyone knows we were the pioneers, and understand the definition of pioneer is somebody with arrows in their backs.
Yeah.
So I don't take my shirt off at the pool anymore because the scars are ugly. You know, we introduced a personal ECG long before any other wearable consumer electronic company, and have now 170 plus peer-reviewed publications. I suspect that maybe 10 times the next digital health company, not 10 more, 10 times. Wow. So it helps to have Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic and Duke, Mass General, Cedars-Sinai as advocates for your technology.
Awesome, thanks. Ian, to go to you really quickly, tell me about your background and about AffirmXH.
Thanks, yeah, and thank you for inviting me on. So my background academically was in bioinformatics, but for the last 15 years, I have been building medical devices, generally combining the hardware and the software components. And the consistent theme has been, it's not just about the number that these devices give you, it's the utility of that. What's the context? And the software's aim is often to try and put that number into context. What do you do with it? Whether you're the doctor guiding therapy, or whether you're actually the end user trying to use these numbers to help you in your everyday life. And so over the past 15 years, I've been trying to develop products that really help those sorts of decisions to be made by providing that all-around context. And one of the things I've realized is quite often we don't know what normal is for you as an individual. And the reason that we don't is often these measurements get taken at the periods where things are not the usual for you. Periods of illness, periods when you're concerned about something. And so what we're looking to do with AffirmXH is really provide continuous monitoring across a range of sensors that can provide more insight by providing this baseline against which you can then judge, are things different from where I normally am? Are they different from where my child normally is, or the adult that I care for? And so what we're looking to do is develop small, very easy to wear, very low power sensors that don't get in the way, that provide as little impingement on your everyday life as we can, so that we can give you that information. And when there is a change, you can understand in the context of where you have been. And increasingly, we would hope physicians would be able to use that as well. This is different from this individual's baseline in this way. And so our first product is a temperature monitor for infants. There is a need that we discovered through market research for this, but we would look to be expanding that over the coming years. Initially in heart rate variability, but as other sensing modalities get developed and we can make them small and easy to use enough, and easy enough to interpret, and when there's a use case, we would look to release those as products over time.
Yeah, the one thing I like, and I'm going to go over to Eric here in a second, about AffirmXH is you kind of epitomize where sensors are going, right? You're kind of on the cutting edge of it, where the whole low power side of it, I see a sensor that's the size of, a coin, a quarter, that can run off a coin cell for up to 6 months, right? And back in the day when we were making sensors before, that was greatly unheard of. But now, wireless technology can take it for many, many miles and for, a long period of time to be able to get data continuously from the body unobtrusive. So that's one of my observations about WellTaught and about AffirmXH, getting that continuous reading, whether it's temperature or heart rate or movement, in a very economical manner. I think that's part of the winning strategy as well.
Yeah, and it's something that takes a lot of research. We've been lucky enough to partner, and so have access to IP around things like power management, which helps enormously in making this as small as it is. But it's got to be unobtrusive. One of the times that people stop using sensors is when they've got to recharge it. As soon as that's plugged into the wall and not on you, it's not doing its job. It's not collecting the information you expect. And so that's why we've made this as low power as it is.
Yeah, I'll go over to Eric really quickly, but just an observation. That's the reason why I like the Cardio Mobile too, because it runs off of a coin cell, right? From that, it's very, very convenient to be able to do it. So Dr. Lester, let's talk about, Movement Interactive and what you're doing in the market today.
Yeah, a little bit of background here. So I started my professional journey about 22 years ago when I enlisted as a nuclear biological chemical specialist. I was very fortunate. I was stationed in a tactical satellite battalion. And so, of course, me being me, I became very interested in satellite communications. And I got 2 jobs for one in the Army. So in my early 20s, I took over a satellite platoon and $22 million worth of equipment, 42 personnel, and deployed to Operation Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom. And so we were the first wave into Kuwait, into Iraq. When I returned, I was recruited out of the Army by Northrop Grumman Mission Systems to go and work for the Joint Interoperability Test Command. Their mission was to integrate the nuclear biological sensors and put them on the computer network. So I made myself the perfect candidate for that. As I continued my professional journey, I ended up at Arizona State doing a PhD in computer science. I worked at the Center for Cognitive and Ubiquitous Computing. And so about 4 years into that program, tragedy struck. I was working on wearable tech and ubiquitous computing, and a local high school football player suffered a concussion and did not make it to the hospital alive. So that was the start of Movement Interactive. It was time to take what we were working out in the lab and commercialize it and start saving lives. So we developed a patented wearable sensor for detecting and reporting head impacts. And so with that, we can track acceleration, rotation, and we use very similar approaches that have revolutionized the automotive industry. So we use a biomedical approach to providing the likelihood of a concussion. Movement Interactive has continued to grow and expand. Some of my community work has turned into a huge opportunity because what we've developed is this person-centered approach to developing the technology. So we put this, the user right at the core of the development. And so my community work was in senior living. And after doing a town hall with my 150 residents, it was apparent that the #1 problem was falls. And so I went back to Movement Interactive and my team, and we started developing solutions for detecting and reporting falls as well. And so excited to be here.
Thanks for having me. One of the exciting projects I think you're doing on is working with the Women's Professional Soccer League as well, right? I think you're in over 160 of the individual teams, right, that are out there. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we are the official provider for head impacts. and baseline testing for the WPSL. And so we will provide support for the 170 clubs that are in that league. So
It's growing.
thank
So
you.
Dr. Albert, I want to go back to you really quickly because you're the best person to ask this question to. You know, have providers been skeptical in using wearable technology, you know, going on the marketplace, coming out from digital health vendors?
Well, I think it's evolving, Kent.
Yeah.
And, you know, with proof in medicine, traditionally, we look for peer-reviewed, independently generated, published data. We look to the Food and Drug Administration and regulators around the world to help guide whether or not we accept a technology as real. And so as some of the digital wearables that come from a consumer angle have come in, I think more and more as they have been validated in published studies, we see them being accepted by the medical community. And I think that's not going to be an overnight thing. That's going to be an evolutionary thing. And as everybody introduces new products, it will be accelerated. But one thing you have to remember is that the large companies in this area, the Googles, the Samsungs, the Apples, have the resources to sponsor the clinical research, just like drug and devices, the Medtronics, the J&Js do. Startups are more challenged and have to really be ninjas at how they get their devices, solutions validated. Because again, payers, regulators, they require data, they require proof. And so I think you're going to see, you know, organizations such as accelerators, Rock Health, you know, ones all over the country, help startups develop the expertise and develop the validation technology needed to be accepted. That's going to be a process.
So you talk about, you know, data that's out there. I'm a big data person to be talking about how data is coming from wearables or other devices. How does machine learning and AI fit into that data that you're receiving from your devices, right, to be able to provide better outcomes?
Both the other gentlemen on this, when you talk about continuous background sensing, you're talking about generating a tremendous amount of data. Doesn't matter if it's temperature, steps, humidity, forget heart rate, and therefore there's no way a human can review that data. Not when you're talking about millions of people. And my friend, Dr. Eric Topol, a famous cardiologist and multi-book author, I just saw him tweet that the acceleration in the acceptance of smartwatches is matching the same rate as the acceptance of cell phones in the 1990s. Mm-hmm. And so you're seeing a tremendous uptake of this consumer-oriented yet healthcare-focused technology. And I think you're, you know, that's a tsunami that won't be stopped. And I just came from a medical meeting in San Francisco, the Heart Rhythm Society, and everyone there is like, well, we have to learn to deal with it. In order to do that, we're going to have AI. AI is based on machine learning. We're not going to be able to scale with humans.
Yeah, I'm going to stay with you just for a second, really quickly. Ian, I'm coming to you in a second. But I always contend that data is not always data, right? It's not all the same. There's really clinically validated data that's coming. And then there's data that may come from a device that merely helps look at a patient and see if they're, quote, normal, right? From that, like to nudge them and engage them into compliance and adherence. Do you see different levels of engagement because of data quality that's out there and how to use that in healthcare?
Well, of course, you know, heart rate monitors have been around for a while, and they're not regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. ECG monitors, electrocardiogram monitors are absolutely regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. So while one is a consumer technology that is very useful for looking at things such as heart rate variability or resting heart rate or nighttime heart rate, that data is working its way into healthcare as doctors learn how to use it. We know how to use an electrocardiogram. We know how to use a rhythm strip. And so that's being accepted much more readily. And so I think there is a distinction, but those lines are getting blurred and getting blurred rapidly, Kent.
Yeah, so let's ask Ian this question. So, and maybe it was also for you, Dr. Albert, but, you know, Ian, from the data perspective, and I know you're doing continuous data out there, you know, are doctors trusting it to go back into the electronic health record? Is the electronic health record ready to be able to receive data coming, patient-generated data coming from home, so that it can be trusted by doctors?
So, well, as Dr. Albert just mentioned, we don't necessarily want all of that data going into the electronic health records. It would be a tsunami going into a system that's not designed to handle that, and nor is it that informative necessarily. And so what is perhaps more useful to both the individual and their physician, their healthcare team, is to identify these periods or events that are of interest and to consolidate around that. And that's where this interpretive layer comes in. So then there's a second step in the question. Does the result of that interpretive layer go into the EHR? You know, the results of the machine learned algorithm or the AI. Or the result of the linear regression or the alert that's basically generated by the confluence of events. So I think what we're seeing is actually increasingly that is being accepted now. There obviously was a push against so-called black box systems where we didn't understand what was going on. But as clinical validation shows over and over again that a lot of these systems are accurate, and as we get deeper understanding into what the machines are actually doing as they're processing this data, then that credibility is increased. And therefore, I think you'll see more and more devices that have this layer, have those results go into the EHR.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'll say is doctors don't need to see more data, but machine learning does, right, from that. So I agree totally with that as well. Let's talk, you know, a little bit about, you know, usability and also cost, right, from that and ROI. So going into your product, how much human factors and usability did you factor into building your program, and also the ROI too? You and I personally have talked about a lot of remote patient monitoring programs today are very reactive because they're costly, they're lunky, you have to ship equipment out to people, and seniors and others may not want to use that bulky equipment. We want to try to get into a middle of this care continuum where there's a lot of people, but it's more proactive. They're not spending a lot of dollars quite yet. So how does that factor all into you reaching people with sensor data or trying to get sensor data to be more proactive? What's your thought behind the design?
Initially, I actually, Eric raised this a few days ago, but I will foreshadow what Eric can add a lot more on here. But initially, is it useful? So a lot of how it fits a product like ours or any other device fits in someone's life is, how is it going to be used? What's it there for? That then provides you with a framework against which you can then assess, is the individual going to use it in this way? So for instance, we mentioned smartwatches. They occupy a real estate on the body that a lot of people are very used to having occupied. It displaces another device that did perhaps less. But for me, this thing is on all the time, collecting data. It fits into an accepted mode of use. Now, if we're introducing another sensor, that area of real estate is already taken. What's our device doing? Does it make sense to put it there? No, it doesn't. Our device would make more sense to put it on the torso. So how do we design a product that fits on the torso but is unobtrusive, doesn't affect how people sleep, doesn't get in the way of their everyday activity, doesn't need to come off when they get in the shower and so on? That's the framework that we then operate in. So for temperature sensing, we really design a very, very lightweight, very small device that can just seamlessly become unobtrusive as soon as it's put on. Other devices don't need that. Other devices do go here, where it's not seamless, but it's useful. And maybe has multiple use modalities here. So, but what I loved about the presentation that Eric gave, which I think he should go into more, is this concept of really digging deep into the voice of the end user and learning from that in your product design. So I won't take more time there, but perhaps I could pass over to Eric.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Yeah, and so this is a concept I call getting over yourself. And it literally applies to the companies, to the researchers, and removing that assumption and that bias out of developing the technology. When we started to develop the Headband, I literally had to get over myself because I had this preconceived notion that football was the #1 sport in concussions. The news told me, the research, all of the articles. But when I talked to the customers, mom was concerned about multiple sports. She was concerned about soccer, baseball. So we had to take that in as a design consideration. But to take it a step further, we actually had to talk to the student athlete. And we realized that the student athlete didn't want real-time data. They didn't want to be removed from the game. They did not want to lose their starting position because they had to sit out. And so we had to figure out a way to get the student athlete to wear our sensor. And when we developed the headband, we found out that that was essential. That was an important, it was an athletic apparel item. And it was more important than the technology for the student athlete. But when we continued to, we conducted over 500 customer interviews, and we found out that that information, the data was essential, that she had that healthcare information on her children in real time.
But you had other user design features as well. I mean, what was the, if you can show the HEG band or whatever, what was the decision to make it into a headband instead of building it right into like a helmet of, you know, a football helmet, right, that's out there?
Yeah, it was actually just doing this qualitative research. I mean, I already walked into it. I played football, the military. So I had the preconceived notion that, hey, the sensor needs to go inside of a helmet. But after listening to the customer's voice and realizing that the customer was steering us in a different direction. They needed a wearable that will cover both helmeted and non-helmeted sports. And so when we started to continue to do the market research, we were able to see and develop a solution that was feasible for the student athlete and also delivered the technology the way we needed as far as collecting the data. So the headband is designed to ergonomically place the sensor on above the center of gravity, the CG, and it gives us the most accurate reading.
Okay, sounds great. Dr. Albert, really quickly, you know, when you put technology like this in the hands of, you know, a non-trained professional into a consumer's hands, what is the risk of, you know, false alarms, false alerts, you know, maybe overreactive as far as data they're receiving from the devices from that versus a professional?
There certainly is. When you make it available directly to consumers without a medical educational component in between them and the technology, there always can be an hypochondriac type response. I can tell you that 10 years ago, I had a very prominent cardiologist call me into their office. And as I entered, I could see they were scowling. And they said, Dave, I gave one of your devices to one of my patients, and he sent me 20 ECGs the first day. And I said, well, both of us have a problem. We've got to learn how to better deal with that. And you have to pick the patients in whom you think this is appropriate and then educate them. And I think, you know, people are learning machines. While many of my colleagues disdain Dr. Google, when somebody comes in to see them and tells them the multitude of diseases they have that they know they have because they found it on Google, the reality is people can learn, and there are many resources online that can help somebody understand what their ECGs is saying. I would just tell you, it's not exactly the Wild West, but I think as these devices become more sophisticated and people, younger people, by the way, who's the chief technology officer of every family? The teenager, okay? They get everything, they help everything, and everybody up to grandma and grandpa. Being a grandpa, I appreciate that, by the way. And I would tell you that as the generations move on, we will have more and more sophisticated senior citizens, because they will have been using technology from a much younger age. And so I think that will help address some of these problems. It won't solve it completely. You'll still have people who develop anxiety, who become obsessed with any personal biometric technology. But I believe time will solve that as it does many things.
So speaking about that, we addressed this question early on, but physicians, when we first started with bringing remote technology and digital health into the home, they were very much concerned about transmitting data to the cloud and it not coming to their attention. And if they didn't bring it to their attention, do they become liable because data was brought to the cloud and they didn't react to it? Do they still have that kind of concern today with the technology?
Yeah, it still exists. Some places more than others. The reality is that's another part of the education process. These are not real-time patient monitoring devices. If they were, then there would be commensurate liability. These are products where people are uploading data either in a relatively continuous or an intermittent basis. And oftentimes they're going to a cloud that the physician does not have real-time access to, nor do they generate alerts. And that's a key liability issue. If it's a patient monitor in an intensive care unit, it generates alerts, and those alerts have to be addressed immediately. These are not alerts, and the Food and Drug Administration, other regulators, and the vendors. You won't see Google or Apple saying their device sends a real-time life-threatening alert. In fact, they say, this cannot be used to diagnose a heart attack. So I would tell you that both sides are making sure, both the medical side and the commercial side are making sure these devices are used appropriately and that they don't represent a new area for liability and litigation.
Gotcha. Yeah, if you ever wanted to sit down and read the terms and service around a glucose meter, it basically is saying you can't use this for anything, around your glucose, and it's for recreational purposes only, right? From that, it really is really distancing. I wanted to stay with you just for a second and talk about what's coming out from AliveCor, because you're on last year and there's some new innovation that's coming out from AliveCor that I wanted to talk briefly about.
Well, here's the world's thinnest ECG.
How the heck does that work?
Cardiomobile card the size of a credit card. And I can tell you, this is, if I can pick it up here, this is a Medtronic Link, which is an implantable loop recorder. I'll hold it in front of me, which is a tiny device, a master of miniaturization. It takes 4 of our cardiomobile cards to be the width of this device. Right. And so this has a 2-year battery life. It has microprocessor, analog electronics, Bluetooth, battery, all in the size and shape of a credit card. Took 5 years to develop this and a tremendous amount of technology. And I had people from Medtronic come to me and say, that's an engineering masterpiece. Well, right. Thank you. I appreciate that. We also have our CardioMobile 6L, which gives you half of the standard 12 lead. And we recently had it FDA cleared, a deep neural network, for evaluating something called the QT network, QT interval. The QT interval is a special measurement of the EKG. And there are only about 80 million people in the United States taking medications that can prolong the QT interval, which can only lead to sudden death. So not anything important or any. And basically every psychiatric drug, during the pandemic, hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, both of those are QT prolonging drugs. People were taking them, and some people had a very bad outcome from taking those two medicines together because they additively prolong the QT interval. So there's a lot of things. And we have a new service called Cardia Complete, which is a disease management program utilizing our technology, blood pressure technology from our partner Omron, and helping with both coaching as well as online cardiology access to really address risk and minimize risk, not only for patients, but for those who are paying their bills. And so we have a variety of new offerings that try to address heart disease, which is still the #1 global killer.
I love the credit card size, and you're right, that is a masterpiece. There is new technology coming out, tattoo circuitry, right, that's out there. You basically have taken the tattoo circuitry and implemented it today, right, into that card, which is awesome, right, from it. So I love it.
It is very tiny. You got to come up with tattoo batteries. And the battery part of this, people look at it and they go, how did you do that? And I could just tell you with great difficulty and expense. So
You're harvesting it from the light, right? From there? No, just kidding.
Well, let's just say we're very happy with the outcome, but it took a lot of effort to get there. And again, something that that a lot of startups would have a hard time. You know, we've sold 2 million devices. You'd have a hard time generating the technology. Again, we have Qualcomm as an investor, pretty good technology partner.
Yeah. So I'm going to go to Ian really quickly on this and around to Eric. But there was a question that came up about can you put the card in a wallet, you know, and what's the risk of it cracking, right, or breaking? Because American Express has to send the credit cards to me as metal because I break them all the time, right? From that, do you really expect people to keep it in the wallet?
Yes,
okay.
I keep mine in my wallet and other people. And to be honest with you, as long as you are a subscriber to our cardiac care service, if you break it, if it runs out, we'll send you a new one. So just like the credit card companies, we'll send you a new one. So, you know, we're fairly confident it's resilient.
Right. It's going to be a challenge, but the next one's metal, right? So like American Express. So, so Ian, we'll go to you really quickly let's just talk about WellTeach, right? So, you know, you're doing continuous, you know, temperature right now. But why did you start with, you know, an infant application with WellTeach?
Market research. And so, as I alluded to earlier, you can't just generate technology and throw it out into the market and expect people to pick it up. There has to be a need. Now, when we were setting up AffirmXH, we didn't actually know that need existed. It intuitively, Tom and I both should have known. We've both got kids. We've both been through these periods where we sent them to daycare. They were getting sick all the time. It would have been nice to have our product back then, but we hadn't made that realization. The company was spawned in part out of the epidemic, and in part because I've been using metrics such as heart rate and heart rate variability as part of athletic training. And so my initial concept was, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a small sensor that was continuously monitoring these to detect very early stage when I'm succumbing to a virus? As we now know from a lot of great research that's been done over the past 2 years. And it was only when we started to do our market research that organically from that came the result from mums and dads basically were taking the survey that, hey, I wouldn't really be interested in this for myself at all. The concept was, wouldn't you like to know this so you can make smart decisions about going into work or not? And they were saying, no, I don't want to know that. I don't see myself using that, and I wouldn't want to share that data with my employer either. It's a fair point of view. But organically, what was emerging was, but if this was my child, I'd really be interested. And so we did some follow-up research where we started to probe more on that and found that actually, yes, there would be a need for a product that allowed parents to make decisions about, you know, when to send their child into daycare and that sort of thing. And that's really where the WellTeach concept came from, was understanding that pain point and realizing that we had a solution to that particular issue. And so that's where our first product is. And over time, we will develop this to add functionality as we fully understand the needs around that. So it's great that the two converge and serendipitous in a way, but that's where it came from.
I know that you're micro-focused on what you're delivering today into that market space, but what other applications do you see that you can use from this? Because you're not going to just do temperature, you're also going to do heart rate and what else, a lot of other
heart rate and heart rate variability are the next two sensing modalities that will be turning on in the device.
As continuous, right?
Frequent episodic, so not running every second of every minute, but running for periods across the day. Now, the reason that we're looking at these is they are quite useful for monitoring overall health. And so I alluded to the fact that, you know, in athletic training, we actually monitor heart rate variability to see whether your body is fully recovered from the last time you stressed it out while training. Heart rate variability can change due to lots of stresses. So in particular, it goes up when your body is under stress. stresses can come from training. They could come from a stressful workplace. They could come from various physiological conditions and various diseases. So it's a fairly generic marker that your body is struggling to address something. And there are various ways of measuring heart rate variability as well, which correlate more or less with various of those conditions. So we will be looking at certain ones of those and embedding those in our product. And that's really where the processing starts to come in. Initially, we can mine the literature, look at what's useful, align that with the product. But over time, I think we'll be discovering a lot of stuff. And the higher the quality of data that we can collect in and the context surrounding that, the more we can gain insight, embed those into things like algorithms that might generate further insight. And so we're, as well as building the product, obviously putting a lot of time and effort into building our back-end systems to handle that sort of generic, initially processing ability to allow us to handle these streams and ultimately develop new insights on the basis of those data feeds. So there's a lot of work going on there, but it's beyond the scope of this initial product. And so, the product works. We like it. We think people will gain a lot of use out of it, but we have our eyes on the future too.
So where does FDA clearance come in this? On the first application you're doing with WellTeach, does that require an FDA clearance?
So it's a continuous skin temperature sensor in its first iteration, which is similar to, say, the Fitbit sense. It's a consumer device. However, we would like to be able to claim that we're able to detect fever. That is something that our product should be able to do. We think that parents benefit from that. That's a fast 2 medical device. And we will be submitting to the FDA for that clearance. When we've got the data and the validation to be able to do it. Dr. Albert mentioned before, we need to be able to do clinical studies. Doing them when you're a startup is difficult, it's expensive, and we realize that it's the end product of a quality development system that starts on day one. We have that system in place. We've built our system using our quality management system. And as we develop the technology to the point where we're able to make claims and have proven those claims, we'll make those submissions to the FDA.
Okay, makes sense. So Eric, let's go back to you. So we're going to wrap up here in a few minutes, but you've gone through and incorporated now fall detection, right, into your products that are out there. What's on the roadmap for you? How are you going to implement the fall detection and other features in the HEG band?
Yeah, so this goes back to our learning and our discovery and this approach that we created with this person-centered design. So this takes us back about 3 years back, as I'm the chairman of the board of a senior living facility with 150 residents. So I called a town hall and we got to hear directly from the residents. And so some of the findings were daunting. We found out that many of our residents were falling. The second problem was transportation. So I set out on a journey to address both of those those top two problems within the senior living space. So when we start looking at falls, what we found out is that in our facility, it's independent living. So we had residents that would fall and would not report it. They would stay on the ground for 4 hours and they would not report that fall because they did not want to get referred to dependent care. So I've started to do the research at the site. So we've conducted several IRB approved user studies. And so we're bringing in several different solutions as we are going through a major renovation of the existing site. So we will be rolling out Google Alexa or Alexa, Amazon Alexa in every residence. We will be rolling out the IoT devices to track and monitor when someone actually falls, not to encourage them to go to dependent care, but to now capture data that was in the past not reported. So
I gotcha. So Dr. Albert, really quickly, I just want to go back to you and we got to wrap up here in a second. one of the questions was, are the payers now embracing, willing to pay for this, right? The solutions, right, that are being put out by KardioMobile, AliveCor?
Well, yes, we have ways for physicians to get paid. If they use our products in their office, there's one set of CPT codes. If they use them in a remote patient monitoring or remote therapy monitoring, there's a whole nother series of CPT codes and a whole nother series of rules and regulations. I mean, one of the things you have to be worried about is a question was asked, does your product sensor need to be FDA cleared in order to be eligible for the RPM type of reimbursement? It's not necessarily true. A scale is not necessarily an FDA class 2 medical device that needs to go through the 510K process, but weights are a very valuable biometric that qualify you for RPM. So it doesn't necessarily have to be FDA cleared, and there are a number of new reimbursement modalities that can be utilized by companies. One of the things you have to understand is the RPM codes. A lot of people talk about RPM, and the official notion of Medicare paid RPM has to be billed by the provider. So the companies can't bill Medicare for what they do. And that's to avoid some of the problems they had with oxygen concentrators and CPAP machines, where companies were billing Medicare and making a lot of money, and the devices were sitting in the homes and not being used. So the providers must show the data and show the value in order to be able to get paid. And then the companies have to bill the providers. Anybody who's billed a doctor, good luck.
Right. I got it. So we're gonna wrap up here really quickly, but what do you see as barriers to to scaling to the next generation of wearables, and to get is it cost, is it regulatory, is it reimbursement? If you're sitting here probably 5 years ago, it probably was reimbursement. What do you think needs to happen now to be able to get your product or wearable products more prolific throughout the US health system?
Who are you asking that of?
You, Dave. Yeah.
Me, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's all of the above. People are getting more comfortable with wearables. Apple has proven that they can sell tens of millions of Apple Watches. The likes of, Google buys Fitbit, Samsung, another major player, plus a lot of companies coming from the medical perspective. I saw that Masimo, a very high-tech medical providers, introduced a consumer watch that's a continuous biometric device. So I think what you'll see is more technology, more competition means lower cost, and then with more AI and more machine learning, turning all that tsunami of data into actionable insights for healthcare providers and individuals. That's what it's going to take to make them truly live up to the potential.
Yeah, a lot of times I talk about just-in-time care, and just-in-time care is looking at data to be predictive when an event's going to occur, so that a response can be done in advance from that. This is what I'm thinking, that a lot of the data coming from these sensors helps providing data for just-in-time care.
In medicine, prediction equals prevention, just as you said.
Right, absolutely. So Ian, let's go over to your side really quickly. So we talked about WellTeach. We talked about, going forward with other sensors and parameters that are coming in. I'm going to ask you this question, since Dr. Albert actually brought up the wearable and the watches that are out there. Do you think we'll get to a point where all the biometrics are actually going to be on the wrist, right, or around the body? So we don't have to ship out all this equipment or additional equipment out there that's clinically validated.
No, I think that utopian vision is probably not in the near future. And around the body, certainly we can get a lot more insight than solely on the wrist. And so I do see there being more location-based wearables providing a richer set of data. But there are still some technologies that will require large-scale investment that can't be initially solved by these wearables. And so I think what we'll see is a gradual development. Some of the really exciting things that machine learning can do provide incredible insight on different types of data that previously we'd only got safe-form imaging systems. So analysis of the sort of tidy of data that Dr. Albert's company is creating to provide great insight into what the heart is doing. Maybe that supplants some of these imaging technologies eventually. But I think that would be a gradual progression. And obviously it's something we've been working on over one of my other companies at Full Vista. But I don't see it all being concentrated onto the wrist, if that was part of the question. I think we've got to look at that, where this data is coming from across the body, and start looking at solutions that some of which may be embedded, some of which are located close to those, and really develop those solutions in the most appropriate location, and so they fit in with users' lives.
Dr. Albert, I'm going to let you answer that question too. I mean, do you see, Apple, I think they said within the next 2 years, they'll see blood pressure.
Yeah, blood pressure. Have you seen it? I can tell you Apple and Google. How about continuous glucose monitoring from the wrist? Have you seen it?
No.
People say, oh, it's coming. Bullshit. Bull.
What about BMI?
Yeah, exactly. And what about concussion? Eric's got a great tool. And you know what that does? That tells somebody this young man or woman needs to go get a CT scan, needs to go get evaluated. That's a critical kind of alert when he is able to detect, a significant deceleration injury. And I think that's not going to be done on the wrist. If it was, then I'd just be doing this all day, messing the thing up. It has to be done with the organ, i.e. the head, the brain. And so I'd turn that over to Eric, because that's just not going to be done at the wrist.
Yeah. Eric, your thoughts on that? Yeah.
So, I mean, just like you said, I mean, we would love to go with some other form of attaching our device, but we're single to the head. It has to be above the CG in order for us to get accurate readings such as acceleration, rotation, and to report that likelihood of a concussion. So,
I gotcha.
Yeah. So when we start looking at that, we have to come up with innovative ways to get compliance. So how do you get the student athletes to actually wear it? So you develop a designer headband that encourages them. This headband matches their uniform. And so instantly, when we were doing customer discovery, we came out with a standard black headband, and the player said, "Mom, I'm not wearing that headband." So we returned with a camouflage headband, and automatically the male players wanted to wear the headband. And so just really unique approaches like that to get compliance and acceptance.
Thanks, Eric. So guys, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm over my allotted time. So thank you again for attending this evening. Thank you to Dr. Albert, Ian, and Eric for participation and great insights. We'll post the recording on www.newnormal.buzz. Our next episode, the delivery of healthcare to underserved communities, is next Thursday on May 12th. We'll be discussing innovative healthcare solutions for underserved populations with Stephanie Boscheri of Amazon Lab 126, with Susan Quartz, CEO of Catalytic Health Partners, and with Christina Noble, Chief Growth Officer of Sonoran Quest Labs, which is a joint venture between Banner Health and between Quest Diagnostics. We hope you join us, and you can find our registration details on newnormal.buzz. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Bye.